Thank you, Dr. Davis, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
No, happy to be here.
And I know as I'm recording, I think it's maybe your loss is my gain because we're recording this in the heart of the storm. So I guess first, kind of formal to ask you how you're doing.
Yeah, we're doing fine. It's actually today's been a lot better. Rain has stopped and some of the rivers are going down. So it's been a rough few days.
Okay. Well, it's good to hear everything's okay. I guess to start with, if you want, I will do an intro in the beginning of the podcast. Is there anything you want to provide any listeners about, just your practice and also how you basically kind of came to promote a plant-based diet?
Sure. I've been in surgery practice for 16 years. I started doing bariatric surgery, which is weight loss surgery, in 2001, and at the time, everything was high protein, and I suggested high protein for my patients. That's all we really knew. Though the funny thing about it is, I would go to these, week-long conferences where we would talk about weight loss surgery. You would think we would talk about diet, but there was no talk about diet. It was, just surgery. That's what you did. That's all there was. And then tell everybody to eat high protein because that's all we knew. And at the time, I wrote a book about weight loss surgery where I told everybody to eat high protein, and I ate high protein myself. But I then went and got a life insurance policy checked. And at the time, I wasn't feeling good. I just didn't feel very healthy, although I just thought that was because I was a busy surgeon. And it came back that I had really high cholesterol, hypertension, and fatty liver. And I was overweight, and I just thought to myself, I'm just becoming like my patients. Like, I see my patients, they get weight loss surgery, they lose a little weight, the weight's coming back on, and they're suffering the same things I'm suffering from, and maybe we're doing something wrong. I mean, maybe I need to look at this a little bit closer. And so I really started getting into nutritional science at that point, and I went ahead and started doing medical weight management and got boarded in obesity medicine, and really started looking through the research. And the more I looked at the research, the more I saw the benefits of plant-based diets, and um, the research was very impressive to me. And so I started changing my diet and the diet of my family, and as we changed and improved, and my cholesterol level went to nothing, and my health and welfare just went up so much. I started working with it with patients and seeing similar results, and led me to write a book about it called Proteinaholic, where the point of Proteinaholic isn't, it's not a book to say you got to eat plant-based or anything like that. It's really a book to say we don't need nearly as much protein as we think we need, and that we certainly don't need it from animal protein, and that we can get it from plant protein. And that was the point of that book, and about a lot of what I teach now. But I run a very, very busy weight management practice in Houston, where we do both surgical and medical weight management.
Great. And I've read your book, I think at least twice, and I had a history of a vegan diet many years, going back to maybe 2011 when Brooks and Eyes first came out. And I will have some questions just about what you would call maybe an ex-vegan and people that report negative symptoms and what your points on that would be.
Sure.
I guess maybe, well, first I got to address maybe, obviously you're definitely one of the featured doctors in the popular documentary, What the Health, and obviously we could probably predict there was going to be people that come out and are going to kind of quote unquote try and debunk parts of that movie. Are,
Of
are
course.
are there any parts of that movie that is there 100% agreement with the way that the film was put together? Or is there anything that you're critical on with regards to that?
Um, Funny, I haven't seen it in a while, but I like anecdotal stuff is fine. It makes a movie. I'm not going to tell someone that their thyroid cancer is going to go away with weight loss surgery. That was what I mean with plant-based diet. That that kind of stuff makes me a little bit. When someone's like, I did a plant-based diet and my thyroid cancer went away. I can't. That's not something that I could support with any kind of literature. Obviously, I back the stuff that Dr. Greger and Dr. Barnard and myself all talked about specifically. A lot of when I'm watching the movie, a lot of the stuff I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know about some of the funding things. I didn't realize some of the things that I was pretty shocked at some of the responses they got, especially from the Diabetes Association.
Sure. And that's why I mean I've listened to probably almost every podcast you've had out there, and I really encourage most people to do that. And I think of all the, I don't know if it's fair to put you in with the plant-based vegan doctors. I think you kind of made it to that echelon of the group of people, but I think of all of them, I think you're the one that to me is the most one convincing, and I think one that seems the most I don't want to say honest. I think they're all honest, but I think you seem like you're the most. I don't know. I think honest is probably the best word. Um,
Yeah, it's not. It's like I think I read all of the literature, not just the plant-based literature. And I could admit the benefits of ketosis diets here, and I could talk about what the benefits are of some of the other diets that are out there and how they I understand. I mean, again, and I say this over and over again. There's a big difference between a plant-based diet and a vegan diet. To me,
sure.
when someone says they're vegan, like I'm vegan, but I'm not vegan for my health. I'm vegan for ethical reasons. I don't want to contribute a single dollar towards the horrible ways we treat animals and to the climate change issues. And so that's veganism. If someone, patients could come in to me. I've seen overweight patients that are vegan, and they come in, it turns out that Oreos are vegan. So
Right.
when someone tells me that they're vegan, that I have no idea what they're eating. But I just know what they're not eating. So that's very different than a whole food plant-based diet, which is a diet very rich in fruits, vegetables, and legumes. That's a completely different idea.
I guess another fair way of looking at it too is I think for instance, obviously Dean Ornish is lumped into the group that you guys are kind of affiliated with, and I think his diet promotes things like, or I think I think his supplement list actually promotes things like fish oils and non-fat dairy and things like that. But is there, you have this big following, and obviously vegans have a lot of passion. Again, the ethics is a big issue. If there were something where, let's say, there was a picture of you with like an Instagram post, you had a 3 ounce salmon fillet. Is there something like that where, you know, that's where I feel like some people watch this and be like, well, do they really eat? Is it pure vegan? And is there a would doing something like that jeopardize, you know, anything? I guess giving talks at vegan conferences and something like that.
Would it? Would it? Oh, are you saying would I? I couldn't give a talk at a vegan conference if I ate salmon. I guess is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my other
That's
point
not
is,
vegan. That wouldn't be vegan.
would
So I wouldn't be vegan in that situation.
I guess a better question would be, would you say, I mean, you're 100% vegan, or and this isn't obviously not trying
Oh,
to be a vetting process at all.
I'm 100% vegan. I mean, I was in Italy and there was some cheese on my food and I didn't freak out about it. But for the most part, I would say I'm 99.9% vegan. I mean, I haven't had any kind of like fish or animal. I just can't. The funny thing is, I could not possibly. It's not. Again, this is not about health. I don't eat that stuff from an ethical standpoint. And once that ethic gets in your brain, for me to put a piece of flesh in my mouth brings to mind the animal itself and what it went through to get there. So, yeah, no, I'm 100% vegan. And, if I'm going to talk to vegans, they want to talk to vegans. That's understandable.
Going along the same lines, do you have any? I guess if you had a patient that came to you and said, maybe I follow I guess any organization that promotes a high plant-based diet, but yet you can have lean meats, or even I guess you could take a typical Blue Zone where they have some animal products here and there. Or I get the question I alluded to earlier. I think in the notes I sent you was, is it okay, quote unquote, to, let's say, or would you say it's okay to a patient if they said, I only have 10% of my diet comes from animal products?
Of course, yeah. I don't
Okay.
with my patients. I don't really teach a vegan diet to them. I mean, a lot of the handouts I give them have vegan recipes, but I emphasize with them. I do that so they could get. The problem is people don't have a concept at all of how to eat without an animal protein on their plate at just about every single meal. And so I try to give them a base of foods that are plant-based, and if they want to add to it, we're basically trying to turn around the plate with my patients. So I'm basically trying to, first of all, take away the whole macronutrient concept. I don't want them counting macros in any way, shape, or form. I don't want them to think about macros, and I don't want them to think about the word protein. So that just, I don't want to talk in those kind of terms with them. But they can add, because to me, like, a piece of steak is not a protein, it's a piece of steak.
Sure.
A fish is not a protein. I hate that kind of concept. When you look at it, steak, there's more fat in it than there is protein, and so why would we call it a protein? It's just very bizarre to me. So, but when I talk with my patients, if I had to say the kind of diet I teach to my patients, it would be more along the lines of a DASH diet.
Okay.
And it's interesting because the guys that came up with the DASH diet out of Harvard had done these great studies about how vegetarians and vegans did fantastic with their blood pressure, and how a plant-based diet reduced blood pressure. And so they then tried to come up with a diet that was very plant-based, but they realized that they probably couldn't get the world to go, vegetarian or vegan. So they started adding, lean meats and fish that they felt would be consistent with a healthy diet, and I think it is.
If someone were to follow, again, this is kind of, I guess, a fitness centric well, it is a fitness centric podcast. If someone were following, let's just say, the traditional, like a healthy, you'd say fitness type of meal, which would be like a lean protein, not a huge amount, like a 4 ounces, let's say lunch and dinner time, vegetables and a lot of, let's say, whole grains and healthy starches. Would that, even that amount of protein, maybe that would be a gram per kilogram, is something like that you find, is that still kind of not health promoting, or is that?
It's it's such a spectrum. It's hard to say. Not health promoting versus what? It's it's health promoting versus a standard American diet, without a doubt. I mean, there's no question the standard American diet. I mean, you got to see what my patients come in and they're eating.
Sure.
Look, there are things. There was a great paper that was produced that came out recently, that was going over the health effects or possible cautions with meat. It doesn't matter where you get your animal protein. Any kind of protein cooked on a grill forms heterocyclic amines, which we know are carcinogenic. So how much is going to cause a cancer? We can't give you that kind of answer. We know that eating that animal proteins increases IGF-1, and IGF-1 is associated with different cancers. And in my book, I list all the different studies along that line. So how much of an IGF-1 can an individual tolerate before they get cancer? I don't have an answer to that. We know that heme iron is extremely oxidizing, damaging to beta cells, causes lipotoxicity, etc., etc. How much heme iron can a person take? I can't tell you that exactly. So, common sense will tell you, yeah, that's probably okay. I guess the real question is, would less of that be better? And my answer is, I think so. I can't tell you with really strong data that that's true. I could tell you that in the Adventist health studies, where you've got a group of people that are all living in a similar environment, living similar lifestyles, the vegans do better than the vegetarians. So, even in those studies, pretty much the less meat you get, the less animal protein you get, the better you do in those Adventist health studies. And it's a big epidemiologic study, so it's got all the flaws of an epidemiologic study, but that's the best study that we're going to get to say, is more animal protein better or worse? But I don't know that I could say, if I had a patient that was eating 2 cheeseburgers a day and now they're coming in saying, I had some eggs with some oatmeal for breakfast, the salad with some chicken strips on it for lunch, and for dinner I had a vegetable stir fry, I'm going to applaud them like crazy and say you're doing a fantastic job.
Great. Going back a little bit to, I guess, one of the big again, quote unquote debunkers of.
I hate that term, debunking. It's so ridiculous.
I know. I can't think of a better term.
I know there's no better term, but it's just so ridiculous. Like, some of the ones I read, at first I was like, I'm going to answer all these, and then I was like, I can't answer these things, because some of it, like when someone get like Nina Teicholz.
That's what I was going to bring up, actually.
Yeah, that was the most ridiculous nonsense. I can't, like, from a scientist standpoint, I was just shocked. Like, to say there is no evidence is flabbergasting to me. That just means that you just haven't looked. Just because you say there's no evidence doesn't mean there's no evidence.
Sure. I mean, if anything, I'm more supportive on everything you say than I think what the high fat people are saying. What's your point of view on? There was some new data that came out from. And she actually is promoting this, that Americans are actually following the USDA advice, saying that fresh fruit is up, red meat is down, veggies are up, eggs are down, nuts are up, and yet there's still issues. And I guess that's like she's making a correlation with meat consumption, red meat going down, obviously, and somehow we're following it better. I personally don't think that's really the case. Just
No,
looking at
it's actually the USDA data actually shows that that's not the case at all. Red
well,
meat, except for red meat. Red meat data is down. We are down on red meat, but we're up on chicken. We're up on pork. We're up on oils. The funny thing, everybody's like, we tried the low-fat diet and it didn't work. We never ever went low fat. In fact, our fat went up. And of course, if you look at the data, and I have that in my book too. If you look at the USDA data, we're just eating more calories than we ever have before.
sure, I have seen that one CDC report. And I think I think also when you put it into practice, you start. I don't think it's hard, but I mean, it's a wake up call. When I did like a very high carb and lower fat diet, how it wasn't difficult, but you really be mindful of just getting used to your taste buds, what low fat really meant versus what I
Right.
thought it meant. I guess kind
Yeah, I
of.
mean,
Sorry.
it's the problem with all these low fat studies. Like they always have low fat versus low carb, which one's better? And so the low carb group will go from an average carb intake of 300 grams, 250, 300 grams of carb a day, down to 50 grams of carb a day. So they make a huge change in their diet. Then the low fat group will go from an average of like 35% of their calories from fat, they'll go down to 30%.
Sure.
So they've hardly really made any change in their diet. And then they compare these two groups. They say, oh, the low carb group did better than the low fat group. Well, first of all, 30% of your fat is not low fat. And second of all, they didn't make a big change in their diet.
Yeah. What's your opinion in general of the USDA guidelines as they stand? I mean, with the exception of probably dairy.
I mean, look, it's hell. Yep, the dairy thing is really funny. That little cup of dairy there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so industry sponsored. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I like. Look, it's different than the pyramid used to be. Which was, this huge amount of grains at the bottom that were probably not healthy grains to begin with. Half the plate is fruits and vegetables. You can't argue with that. A quarter of the plate is grains, and then a quarter of the plate, they have that word protein, which I can't stand because, again, I don't like labeling foods like that because that's when you start getting into this problem where you equate a carb with a carb. And it's just not true. But they say in there, and plant-based proteins can be part of that protein. So in general, I kind of like the plate. I think the plate, if people ate the plate, we would have a much healthier society. No one's eating the plate.
I agree.
We
Yeah.
we eat a fraction of our calories from fruits and vegetables. And the funny thing is, if you look at that USDA CDC data, looking from 1970 up till now about how we changed, I mean, that's like the one food group that doesn't increase is the fruits and vegetables. But everything else does. So yeah, no one's eating the plate except me. I'm eating the plate.
Going back to, I guess protein specifically. I guess the question that might come in most people's minds, and if you read the book, I think you address it. But I'll ask the question. I'll also bring up another point too. Is it protein in general, or is it what comes with the protein? And I guess what I segue to that also. I don't know if you're familiar with Jose Antonio's work.
Mm-mm.
Kind of a sport. Yeah, he's definitely more in the sport nutrition world. Some people call him kind of like Dr. Protein. He's done the famous kind of protein overfeeding study with athletes. But he also checked their renal function and things for a year.
Oh yeah, is he at McMaster University?
I think he's somewhere in Florida.
Stuart Phillips. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I guess maybe his overfeeding study didn't come anything back. But I mean, I even asked him after a conference. I mean, obviously, to get that much protein, they were eating more of a supplement than they were whole animal sources because that would bring with it everything else. But what's your point? Anything related to that?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a good question, and there is something to there were some pretty good studies looking at why do plant-based diets do well with hypertension, because they do particularly well with hypertension. And part of the studies, Jeremiah Stamler, who's quite an expert in this, found that it might be glutamic acid, which is much higher in vegetable protein than it is in animal protein. Certainly, animal proteins tend to stimulate IGF-1 more than plant proteins do. We think that might actually be leucine specifically, which tends to be higher in animal proteins than plant proteins. And now IGF-1 might actually be good for athletes, but may not be good for cancer development long term. And so, there's a big difference between looking at diet for athletic purposes and looking at diet for health purposes. They're not always the same. So if you look at the data with professional athletes, especially bodybuilders, who somehow look so healthy but are so not healthy, when you look at their average life expectancy, it's really pretty scary. And so, and that might not just be their high animal protein intake; it might be their steroids and all the other stuff they do. But point being, just because someone looks healthy doesn't mean they're healthy, but they definitely are getting huge amounts of IGF-1, and that might help grow muscles. Although there's a lot of guys on plant-based diets that grow muscles without that huge IGF-1 burst. There's other things. I mean, there's more complex science that people are looking at now, like mTOR activation. I don't know how much your audience wants to hear about mTOR and its effects on aging, and possibly leucine being a big part of that, which is lower in plant-based proteins, or possibly methionine, which is an important feed for cancer cells. And so there are definitely components that each protein, that animal protein versus plant protein tend to have differences. But then, as you mentioned, there's the other stuff. There's the fact that animal protein typically comes with endotoxins, which stimulate an inflammatory response, or that they come with heme iron, like we talked about before, or AGEs, or new 5GC, or all these other different things that we're starting to see that are coming in the animal products that are not in the plant products, and that may have a big effect in it too.
And kind of referencing him again, he's actually, I think, the CEO he's basically in charge of the International Society of Sports Medicine, which is like the biggest journal in sports nutrition. And they have position stands every so often. The most recent one was on protein. And I think they state for athletes, and just for athletic performance, it was, I think it was 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Is that to you still kind of excessive, or is there still a context that maybe is applicable, but maybe there's a trade-off for health? Or I guess, what's your opinion on that?
In my book, in the section under athletics, I hedge quite a bit and say this I go through a lot of the studies there, mainly, again, not in athletics, but in elderly people looking at sarcopenia, where they did higher protein and it didn't seem to make a difference. Some of the studies that I hear coming out of these guys where they say higher protein does make a difference in muscle development in older people, they don't control for calorie intake, so they're giving them more protein but also more calories, which is very important. Sure. 1.2 grams per kilogram of lean body mass is probably not going to be too high, but I mean, it depends on, is that all processed turkey meat where you're getting tons of nitrates?
Right.
What's your genetic history? Do you have heart disease? I mean, if you're a guy who's susceptible to heart disease and here you are taking in tons of animal protein and you're getting TMAO, which is another thing we haven't talked about, and saturated fats, and your LDL cholesterol is going up, that's terrible for you. I mean, if you happen to be one of these guys who has, no heart disease history, and saturated fat doesn't tend to affect your LDL cholesterol and all that stuff, then I guess it's probably okay. And it's so hard to give you definitive answers for me.
Sure.
And I am an athlete, and I do triathlons and marathons, and for a 47-year-old guy, I'm pretty fit.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't for 1 second ever think to myself, how much protein where am I getting my protein? I just don't, it never crosses my mind. And it used to, and when I used to be fanatical about protein, I did horribly in athletics, and now I'm doing better than ever. And there's so many, again, anecdotal evidence of these amazing plant-based bodybuilders and athletes that aren't paying any attention to protein and are doing just as well, that it makes me start to question some of this. I mean, there's only been one study that I've ever seen that I thought was impressive that showed a benefit to high protein in maintaining muscle mass while cutting weight. Out of McMaster. And so basically they were on a calorie deficit diet, but they went to a higher percentage protein of that diet in order to maintain muscle mass. That was the only study that to me had any real benefit. A lot of the other studies, either they're looking at muscle protein synthesis, which is really not a very good measure. I'd much rather look at actual lean body mass development and 1 rep max and things like that. And when they do show a benefit, it's such a small benefit, like so tiny a benefit, that I start to ask myself, am I going to go and supplement and eat all this extra protein when I know it's increasing IGF-1 and it's giving me heme iron and my TMAO is going to go up? And is it worth it? And to me, I say, no, it's not worth it.
I know you're very vocal about obviously the low carb and the high meat diets, and I just had on. I'm not trying to make this like to say anything specific about the guy, but I just a general comment. I actually, so the semester started up, and I'm a college professor. I already had a student come in 2 days ago, already talking about Dr. Shawn Baker. And the carnivore diet that is now gaining, it seems like, some popularity, because I'm already having college students tell me that they're going to try this. What do you predict? He's doing a study. Obviously, it's kind of a self-funded social media study. I mean, he's also doing a self-experiment. What do you predict from something like that? And also, what's your opinion on this carnivorous, extreme low-carb diets that are out there now?
Yeah, well, look, if you're really going to do a low-carb diet, like if you really, the real ketosis diets, I mean, the ones that are really good are going to want to be higher fat, not higher protein, because your body will start to take that protein and break it down into amino acids that will be utilized for gluconeogenesis. So you're going to start, taking protein and forming sugar from it, which is going to interfere with the ketosis. So, the true ketosis diet should be a high fat, not necessarily a high protein diet. Sure. I mean, Shawn he's an amazing specimen, but I don't know Shawn's background and if he was an athlete all his life. You got to look at that too.
That's what I asked him too.
Yeah, was Shawn an athlete all his life?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I kind of, at the end of that interview, I asked him that, because he'll make that case with Rich Roll. I mean, on the opposing end, being a vegan, that, you could have fed him a junk food diet and he'd still be a great athlete.
Right. And so those are kind of complex questions. I mean, the question is, if you took, and they've tried these studies, and I have not been impressed. Certainly, an athlete can function in a ketosis-generating diet as effectively as he did before, but not. I have not seen anything that's convinced me more effectively.
Great.
And in fact, every ketosis study that I've looked at, and I've looked at a ton of them, the weight loss and the benefits from the ketosis study come from a calorie deficit. Now, if you want to say the whole benefit of the ketosis diet is it limits your hunger because of the ketones, okay, great. You can make that claim for sure. But I mean, Shawn, look, that guy could row a hell of a lot more, a hell of a lot faster than I could row. But does that prove that a carnivorous diet is good for your long-term health? No, absolutely not. I have no idea what's going on the inside of his vessels. I know this. I know that if you take a group of people and you give them cream versus orange juice versus water, the water and the orange juice have absolutely no inflammatory mediator change. But the cream group, your IL-18, your IL-1 all shoot through the roof, and TNF-alpha. I know that if you take a group of people and you give them meat, and then you check their blood vessels and how they relax after that consumption of meat, they don't relax very well. And I know that if you take someone with heart disease and you don't give them any meat whatsoever, that the heart disease actually regresses, and there's no other diet that's been proven to do that. And so everything he says goes against these things that I know. He's quite a specimen, but that's just an anecdote of one. Just like I wouldn't tell you that a vegan diet's going to cure thyroid cancer like it shows in What the Health.
I was almost going to ask this question towards the end, but I don't know. It might be like a silly question, but I mean, would you say the vegan diet is kind of I don't know how to word it, like almost like a new world type of diet? I hate to use the word a hack, but is it the way humans were supposed to eat, or if we were eating more of a meat-based diet, would we just die earlier, and now we found this better way of eating?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, people talk about paleo and things like that. In ancient time, it was all about, surviving whatever kind of calories we could get in, and it wasn't about long term. So we were living at subsistence levels. Now we're living to 70. The question is, can we live to 100? Can we live to 120? And can we do that healthy? And so we're we're starting to look at, well, what optimizes aging, and it's certain angiogenesis is preventing cancer, is preventing heart disease, all these kind of different things, and certainly there's obviously, as I shared in the book, I've got a lot of evidence to show that a plant-based diet does all of those things. Is it the optimal way for a human to eat? Let me put it this way. It without a doubt, back to the quote-unquote debunking. Nina Teicholz says a plant-based diet is nutrient deficient. Absolutely. I don't know if you saw the video, I wrote a response to Nina Teicholz with all the data showing, without a doubt, plant-based diet eaters tend to get more nutrients than animal eaters. And then when you get to the things like iron, while they have a little bit lower iron levels, that may be actually very protective because they're not getting heme iron, and they don't have increased anemia. And there's only one, maybe two nutrients that a vegan diet is going to be deficient in. B12, which I would argue, you should see, I go through so many labs on patients, thousands, and
Sure.
so many of my meat eaters are B12 deficient too, so keep that in mind. But if we were eating like they were eating in the old days, where they would pick up their plant out of the dirt and eat the dirt, which, by the way, their soil was a lot richer than our soil, you would get B12 because you'd be eating bacteria. The problem is we don't do that now. Everything is washed and cleaned, and so you need a B12 supplement. I take a little B12 pill once a week. That's it. That's all I've ever done. I miss it some weeks. No problems. The other questionable deficit would be omega-3 fatty acids. Some people are able to take ALA and convert it. Others may not be as efficient. I do think in some of the studies on vegan diets, when you look at them, and they do all have, better heart disease profiles than meat eaters. If you look at the EPIC studies and the specifically the EPIC Oxford study, but there may be some problems in having too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3 in the diet, and so maybe an omega-3 supplement with microalgae may be beneficial. Certainly, when you look at our anatomy, we're perfectly designed to eat fruit.
Would you say we are in herbivore? There's vegans out there saying that we're herbivores versus an omnivore.
Yeah, look, technically we're omnivores because we could eat anything and survive. But if you look at us compared to a bear, for instance, everything about we've got much bigger hindgut. We're a hindgut fermenter. We have masticating jaws. We don't have large canines. We produce amylase in our saliva. We're much more like the frugivores, like apes and things like that. Now people say apes will eat other animals and they eat insects, and they do those things, but it's just a very, very small part of their diet. And in fact, there was a great study in the Congo that showed if they've got ample fruit, that's all they'll eat. And so I kind of think that we're that way too.
I have to ask you about, since you're obviously an expert in the stomach and the GI tract and everything with that respect, what about the argument of, as far as our GI tract being different than, let's say, a bonobo, where our large intestines are much shorter compared to that of an ape who can ferment these things?
They are shorter compared to an ape, without a doubt, but they're much longer than the carnivores by far too.
Okay.
The argument that comes in, which is not a wrong argument. Denise Minger and I got into it. I've got to say, I have come to respect some of the opposition sometimes, because I'm impressed by some of these people that are not in the medical field or in the scientific field, and their breadth of knowledge on some of this stuff. But she was making the argument that they get enough protein from plants because they can eat so many plants and ferment them better than we can. But if that argument's true, then you would have to show me some protein deficient vegans, because I have never seen it. I just haven't seen it. I know vegans that are professional bodybuilders, professional tennis players, professional triathletes, runners. None of them protein deficient.
Well, this is a segue, I guess, to, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I definitely still want to touch on de novo lipogenesis, but
Yeah.
my previous experience. I mean, I could eat tree bark and be happy with it. I really don't have any like cravings for meat or any special cravings, but I tried so hard to adopt a vegan diet, but inevitably, maybe about every, I'd say the 5 month mark, my GI tract would just get. I mean, I just would have something I never had before. It would be consistently for the 5 times I would try it. Just a bowling ball in my stomach, and everything I ate just became harder and harder to digest. If anything, I think fruit was easiest, but I tried all the different, as far as recommendations and versions that you could think of. Obviously, still supplementing, and there were other symptoms as well, to the point where I just couldn't. I'd finish dinner almost every night, and I had to sit on the couch just being lightheaded. I just had no energy. I don't know where that came from. Uh, and I mean, canker sores and all sorts of things led me to think, I didn't have this stuff before. And when I went back to just a quote unquote, maybe a normal diet, these things went away. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, look, you know, there may not be one diet for all of humanity. I don't, in my personal working with people, and especially when people come to me and want to do a vegan diet and I work with them, I encounter these things, but we're always able to discover what it is and how to get around it.
Sure.
I think there's several things I find that it's a problem when people are adopting a plant-based diet. First of all, they go too fast with the jump in fiber. So the average American is doing like 12 grams of fiber a day, and they jump to like 30 grams of fiber in a day,
Yeah.
and then they have GI problems and they wonder why. And that's a huge jump, and you're just not going to be used to it.
Yeah.
And so you have to give your body time to adapt to the fiber intake. There's ways to cook certain fibers like beans. I have my patients. I think legumes. Oh, I mean, we could get into the legume things, but the whole lectin stupidity and this idea that lectins are killing people is like so ridiculous.
I will admit that, I mean, the newest Plant Paradox book, I know you're very critical of it.
Oh my God.
I mean, I fell for it a little bit.
Ridiculous.
I go back and when I look at it, but I mean, it was intriguing just knowing some of the things about plants I didn't know about. That I don't necessarily
the mice
promote it.
studies convinced you. The studies on the mice.
Yeah.
It's got all this data. No, I mean, look, the healthiest populations in the world eat tremendously huge amounts of lectin-producing foods. I mean, without a doubt, legumes are probably the healthiest food you could possibly eat. But some of them have to be prepared properly. And of course, when you prepare them, the lectins get cooked out of them. But like I have my patients soak the beans with a teaspoon of baking soda overnight before they cook them. I have them use digestive enzymes in the beginning with alpha-galactosidase just to help the breakdown process in the beginning. I do put them on probiotics. It's amazing to me, and we're learning more and more about the microbiome, but the microbiome of a plant-based eater and a microbiome of a meat-based eater are completely different, and it's an interesting, there was a great article in 2014 in Nature, and they were looking at if you took someone and then you put them on a vegan diet for 2 weeks, it completely changed their microbiome. And as soon as you added back meat, it changed back. And we used to think that once you have your microbiome, it was almost like a fingerprint, that once you got it, that's who you are, that's what your microbiome is. But we're now finding that it's very, very fluid based on what you're eating. And so you've got to change your microbiome in order to tolerate some of these foods. And if you don't do it properly, or if you don't give it time to change, you're not going to adapt properly. And then the other thing that I've seen has been a real problem is people go vegan and they try to do it all with salads.
I mean, that wrecked me. Yeah, I had
Yeah, and that's just too much. And then then you're taking in a lot of FODMAPs,
Yeah.
I don't know if your listeners know what FODMAPs are, but different oligosaccharides that can sometimes cause gas, and it's a huge fiber bulk. The other problem with that is you're not getting enough calories. And so if you're just eating fruit, like I know fruitarians who are some of the healthiest people I've ever seen, they eat basically just fruit. But let me tell you something. When I say they eat just fruit, they eat tons of fruit.
Yeah.
They eat fruit. I mean, you go into their closet. There's a group of guys.
I know Mike Arnstein. Yeah, I know your buddy.
Arnstein,
Yeah,
right?
he's
And
nuts.
Arnstein's like that. And there's this guy Cyrus in who runs this diabetic group. He's a type 1 diabetic. And I mean, the amount of fruit these guys eat is just flabbergasting. And so unless you're eating that much, you're going to get a huge calorie deficit, which is why it works great for me when I'm using it with weight losses. I give people and this goes back, and I talk a lot about this in the book, the volumetrics. If I'm giving people a large fiber load, it's filling up their stomach, they don't get that many calories, and they lose weight. But I mean, if you're an athlete and all you're eating is salads, you're not going to get enough. And here's my big thing is all these talks about, like, there's a big study coming out right now called the Pure Study. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so the Pure Study says that carbohydrates are the real problem. Now, they're looking at populations that are eating like complete junk food carbohydrates. So just to say that line, carbohydrates are the problem, misses in a huge way the difference between a junk carbohydrate and something like a potato. And so what happens with my patients is they say, oh, I read the study, the Pure Study that says that carbohydrates are bad, therefore I'm not going to eat a potato. The potato wasn't the problem.
Yeah.
You know, it might have been the potato, the fries that you had were the problem. But to me, one of the most important things in adopting a plant-based diet are starches.
And that digested, no question, easiest. I think going back to athletics, I think I was mindful of calories and also not being crazy with protein, but getting those protein from legumes and grains, I think really did me over, where if I did more starches and won't focus on protein, I think it would have been better.
Exactly. So I never think once about protein. My vast diet is starches. That's like what I really focus on, is where do I get my starches? And that's what people are so afraid to eat a starch in this ridiculous society we have that have somehow labeled starches as a problem, that they're so afraid to eat a starch that they then don't get enough calories. They eat way too much vegetables and legumes because they're trying to get so much protein in, and then they feel gassy, they feel sick, and they feel weak.
Yeah, we're actually doing a study this semester. We're doing with about 30 or 40 students, basically a very high carbohydrate, low fat diet. But what this concern is just educating them on how many carbohydrates and getting them used to eating what is a very low fat and higher carbohydrate diet that would be a lot more starches than they're used to.
Right.
This kind of leads us into a nice kind of the final topic, and I'd really be mindful of your time. Just de novo lipogenesis, just explaining what it is, and then, one question I'll pose while you're introducing it is it so much that we can, and we haven't introduced yet for people that have heard what it is, but is it really so much that we can eat as many carbs as we want, not as many, but a large number of carbs with fat being low, or is it more that carbohydrates are more satiating, being like starches, for example?
Yeah. The legitimate questions, we don't have 100% of the answers, obviously. Holt did a really good study where he was measuring satiation with different meals, and he gave people different foods and tried to come up with a satiation scale. And just off the top, with like one of the most satiating foods you could possibly eat was a potato, which is a little bit odd because you would think that would cause some glucose fluxes, which would stimulate hunger, but without a doubt it was a potato. And what about that starch is so satiating? I don't have a good answer. But the thing about the starch that I like is it's extremely hard for the body to turn it to fat.
Mm-hmm.
In order to do so, you have to saturate your entire glycogen stores. So if you radioactively label fat and you watch someone eat fat, in men it tends to go to the belly, and women it tends to go to butt and legs. It doesn't go, interestingly too, fat doesn't go straight to energy. It's not like if you eat fat and then you go and work out, you will immediately burn that fat. In fact, for whatever reason, the studies are weird, but the fat seems to be mobilized from the upper body in order to give energy during exercise. I don't know how clinically applicable this is, but the point being, when you eat fat, Dr. McDougall says the fat you eat is the fat you wear.
Sure.
And that tends to actually show itself to be true when you look at radioactive label studies. Now, on the other hand, the starch you eat does not turn to fat. It tends to go either directly for energy or to be stored as glycogen. And you would have to completely saturate your glycogen stores, and you would have to completely go over your net energy levels in order to then start the de novo lipogenesis process, where actually sugar molecules are going to go through a process where they're converted into fat. That happens. I mean, they did a huge overfeeding studies where they fed people tons and tons of carbs, and only about 2% of the carbs that they gave them were ever turned into fat through de novo lipogenesis. And by the way, you always hear about the thermic effect of food, where, you know, if you eat food, people say, well, if you eat protein, it takes calories to burn it, which is true. It's not a lot, but de novo lipogenesis is an energy intensive process. So while carbs don't give you a huge thermic effect of food, if you're going to start eating a ton of carbs to the point where you're getting to de novo lipogenesis, you are going to start increasing metabolism at the same time too. And so eating pure carbs are not going to cause you to gain fat. Now, it's true that eating pure carbs will raise insulin, and so if you're insulin resistant, well, now you're going to have an effect on the breakdown of fat already in your stores. But you know, if you put someone on a low-fat, very high-carb diet, like let's say, you know, some of the best studies, so one diet that just did gangbusters was the rice diet, where, why am I blanking on his name?
Kempner?
Yes.
Yeah.
Walter Kempner put people on the rice and fruit, and you know, had amazing success with that. People don't understand why, and it's quite simple. It's because it was satiating, and it's very hard for the body to turn that to fat. And you know, people always ask me, I mean, is there a way you could eat enough carbs that you get fat? Yeah, but you know, that's huge calorie excess. I'll tell you there's no one macronutrient that's responsible for the obesity epidemic and Western disease that we have. There's no one food that's responsible for it all, but it's this combination of high calorie, low nutrient, high fat, and high carb diet that we eat that's the problem. It's not one thing. But the point I really want to make is that, you know, people are like deathly scared of carbs, which they then like, you know, I'll say to a patient, I want you to eat an apple. And they're like, but that's a carb. I can't eat an apple. I'd rather eat this protein bar. And I just want people to understand it's much healthier to eat an apple than a protein bar.
I mean, going back to what you just said about, I mean, kind of like the mixed type of diet, and that, and you saying there's really no macronutrient that's in charge of weight gain, but yeah, I mean, we just kind of talked about how carbs, that's like a free food, but with carbs in the absence of fat, essentially how like calories and carbs with fat, they shut down.
Right. I mean, the whole thing is if you're eating a lot of fat with a lot of carbs, and you're, you know, now, I mean, to really discuss these, you got to start getting into intramyocellular fat. So if you're eating a lot of fat with a lot of calorie excess and not exercising, you start to get fat in your muscle cells. You start getting fat in your muscle cells. Your muscle cells can't produce insulin receptors. You become insulin resistant. Now, if you're eating carbs that are stimulating insulin secretion, but your body can't get the carbs into the muscle cells, so it has to get even more insulin be released. And now you're starting to get, you know, a problem with eating carbs because they're also coming with the fat and you're insulin resistant.
Great points. I think people and myself will be re-listening to this. And one last kind of final point with, again, kind of getting to like fat phobia. I mean, there's some vegans that are out there. I mean, I'm not going to say names, but I mean, I look at them and I'm like, they need to eat something. I mean, they're like almost too skinny. These are kind of I don't know, that's just my opinion. Is there such a thing as almost being, I mean, taking this to a level where obviously they're promoting low fat, but it's getting, I mean, is there a point where you say that's a little too extreme? I mean,
yeah, I'm sure. Look, obviously, people go too extreme on just about everything. There's, you know, too extreme low carbers, and there's too extreme low fatters, and there's I mean, I eat fats, I eat nuts and avocados and all those kind of things. They're, you know, what people, you know, Dr. Ornish's studies and Dr. Esselstyn's studies where they showed regression of heart disease, which is to me one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. Is the actual regression of heart disease with these diets. Those were extremely low-fat diets. But what Ornish says is this diet is appropriate for people who actively have coronary artery disease. But if you don't actively have coronary artery disease, you do not have to be on that low fat of a diet. You know, I think the simple thing, again, my huge problem in the world is is this whole nutrient reductionism where we're talking about fats versus carbs
Yeah.
versus protein. Because again, what is a fat? I mean, an avocado is a fat, but it's a lot more. And so what I just want people to do is just eat foods, whole foods, predominantly plant-based, natural foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, potatoes. I mean, that's what I want people eating. What I don't want them eating is fried foods and added oils, and processed meats, and that's the stuff that's getting people sick.
Is there any kind of final note just on what you'd a general thing you'd say to someone who's again more athlete centric, not so much athlete, but maybe the general person who's looking at, I guess you could say, aesthetics for getting into shape, and the type of diet you'd recommend?
Yeah, I mean, from an aesthetic standpoint, the funny thing is, people will see me and they'll be like, "Oh my God! I mean, how are you our age in keeping that fit? I mean, you must have amazing willpower." And the funny thing about it is, I don't feel like that it takes any willpower. Everything I eat tastes good. I have big pasta dishes and all kinds of great healthy meals, and I'm never cutting or bulking or all these other terms that you hear. And same with my colleagues that are like that. It's like it's almost like you just never even have to worry about that stuff anymore. I don't worry how many calories I'm getting and how much protein I'm getting. We just like that whole part of my life is done with, is gone. I just eat a healthy diet and feel fantastic at all times. It's like this constant feeling of vigor and health, and I keep putting on muscle, which is weird to me at 47 years old, and I keep getting faster, and I keep setting PRs both in how much I lift and how fast I run, and that's all done with very little thought process as to what to eat. And I don't do all these meal preps and all that stuff. I just eat plant-based food, and that's the beauty of it. Is if we stop this just obsession with macronutrients and just eat a whole food diet, it changes everything.
That was tremendous. Anything else you want me to, or where can people find you? I guess the best way to kind of close this out.
Yeah, I mean, I do posts from time to time on Dr. Garth Davis on Facebook, where I'll kind of discuss some of the literature and things that are out there. Otherwise, my book's Proteinaholic, where I really kind of try to answer a lot of the questions that we're talking about. But if anyone's interested in the actual scientific literature, I think I have something like 800 studies in there. I went through thousands of studies to write that book, so it should give a lot of this information if people want more.
And then your Twitter is at Dr. Garth Davis?
Yes, I think it is, yes.
Okay, because that's a great resource as well.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll just say a formal goodbye to you off the air.
Okay.
Thank you.